The crystal wine glass shattered against the hardwood floor, and every conversation in my dining room died. I stood there, trembling fingers still extended where the glass had slipped, watching burgundy wine spread across the oak like spilled blood. 24 guests stared at me. My son Michael, his wife Sandra, my grandchildren, neighbors I'd known for decades, all frozen mid-bite with their forks suspended over my homemade pot roast. Jesus, Josephine. Sandra's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Can't you even hold a glass anymore? The smell of rosemary and thyme from dinner mixed with a sharp scent of wine, but all I could focus on was the sudden ringing in my ears. Not from the crash. From the way she said my name. Not Mom Aldridge like she had for 15 years. Just Josephine. Cold. Clinical. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. I'm sorry everyone, I whispered, dropping to my knees to gather the glass shards. My arthritis screamed in protest, but I couldn't bear to look at their faces. I don't know what happened. What happened, Sandra continued, her voice growing louder, is that we're all walking on eggshells around someone who can't take care of herself anymore. The sound of her chair scraping back made my stomach clench. I could smell her expensive perfume as she moved closer. That sickly sweet jasmine she wore like armor. Sandra. Michael's voice held a warning, but it was weak. Spineless. Just like his father had been in his final years. No, Michael. Someone has to say it. Her designer heels clicked against the floor as she paced behind me. Your mother is becoming a burden. She can't drive safely anymore. She forgets conversations we had yesterday. And now she can't even serve dinner without making a scene. The word burden hit me like a physical blow. I'd taught Shakespeare to ungrateful teenagers for 4 decades, survived my husband's slow death from cancer, raised 2 children as a single mother when Robert was deployed overseas. Burden. My neighbor Mrs. Chen cleared her throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should face reality, Sandra snapped. She needs professional care. Memory care. Somewhere with trained staff who can handle these episodes. As if grief and loneliness were symptoms of dementia. I stayed on my knees, picking up glass pieces with steady hands, letting her words wash over me like poison rain. But inside, something cold and calculating was awakening. The same part of me that had once convinced the school board to fire a principal who was embezzling lunch money. The part that knew how to wait. How to plan. How to strike when it would hurt most. You're probably right, I said quietly, not looking up. My voice carried just the right note of defeat. I have been more forgetful lately. Sandra's tone immediately softened, probably thinking she'd won. It's not your fault, Mom Aldridge. These things happen. But Michael and I have been researching some really nice facilities. Have you now? I stood slowly, glass shards cupped in my palm like deadly confetti. How thoughtful. There was something in my voice that made Michael finally look up from his plate. We locked eyes for just a moment, and I saw him flinch. But he remembered that tone from when he was 16 and came home drunk. When I'd waited until morning to destroy him with calm, measured consequences that lasted months. Well, I said, forcing a smile for my guests. Who wants dessert? I made apple pie. The conversation gradually resumed as I walked to the kitchen, but I could feel Sandra's eyes on my back, assessing, calculating how quickly she could get me out of my own house. My house. The one Robert and I had bought with our first teaching salaries, where we'd raised our children, where I'd nursed him through his final months. In the kitchen, I threw the glass shards in the trash and pulled out my phone. Charles Whitmore, my attorney, had told me to call him any time. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Friday night, but Charles owed me more favors than he could count. I'd tutored his dyslexic son through high school graduation when no one else believed the boy could read. The phone rang once before his familiar voice answered. Josephine. Everything all right? Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Sandra holding court at my dining table, probably explaining to everyone how difficult it was to deal with elderly relatives. My grandchildren, sweet Emma and little Jake, sat quietly, confusion written across their faces. "Charles," I said, my voice steady as granite, "I need to make some changes to my will. Tonight." There was a pause. "It's pretty late, Joe. Can this wait until—" "No," I interrupted, watching Sandra gesture dramatically with her perfectly manicured hands. "It cannot wait. And Charles, bring your notary." As I hung up, I heard Sandra's laugh echo from the dining room, bright and victorious. She had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, when Charles arrived with his briefcase and legal documents, her entire future would change forever. But first I had apple pie to serve, and a performance to give that would make Lady Macbeth proud. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 11 times as the last guest finally left, their uncomfortable goodbyes still echoing in my ears. Sandra had made sure to hug me extra tight at the door, whispering how, "We'll figure everything out together, Mom," while Michael avoided my gaze entirely. Now the house felt hollow, filled only with the sound of dishes clinking as I loaded the dishwasher. The burgundy stain on my dining room floor had already set. I'd left it there deliberately, a reminder of what had been said in this room tonight. My hands moved automatically, scraping plates, rinsing glasses. 47 years of hosting dinners had made these motions muscle memory. But my mind was elsewhere, running through calculations and contingencies like I used to when planning final exams that would make my students think twice about coasting through senior year. The doorbell rang at exactly 11:34 p.m. Charles Whitmore stood on my porch looking rumpled and concerned, his briefcase in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. Behind him, a thin woman with tired eyes clutched a notary stamp. "Josephine," he said, studying my face in the porch light. "You sounded different on the phone. What's happened?" I stepped aside to let them in, catching a whiff of Charles's aftershave, the same brand Robert used to wear. For just a moment, the familiar scent made my chest tighten with grief so sharp it took my breath away. "What's happened," I said, leading them to Robert's old study, "is that I've been reminded of some uncomfortable truths tonight." The study still smelled like his pipe tobacco, though he'd been gone 5 years now. His law books lined the shelves. He'd gotten his degree before switching to banking, and his reading chair sat empty by the window. I'd kept everything exactly as he'd left it, including the half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. Charles set his briefcase on the mahogany desk and clicked it open. "Joe, you're scaring me. Are you sick? Has something happened with Michael?" "Oh, something's happened with Michael," I said, settling into Robert's chair. The leather creaked familiar protests. "But not what you might think." I told him about dinner, about Sandra's words, about the way my own son had sat there, spineless, letting his wife plan my exile to some sterile care facility where I'd wither away surrounded by strangers. Charles's face grew darker with each detail. He'd known Michael since he was in diapers, had watched him grow from a sweet boy who brought me dandelions into a man who apparently couldn't defend his own mother. "Jesus Christ, Joe," he muttered when I finished. "I'm sorry. I had no idea Sandra felt that way." "Neither did I said. "But I'm grateful she showed her true colors tonight, in front of witnesses. It makes what I'm about to do so much easier." The notary, introduced as Margaret Chen, no relation to my neighbor, had been sitting quietly in the corner, but now she leaned forward. "Mrs. Aldridge, I need to ask, are you making these changes under duress? Has anyone threatened you or—" "The only threat," I interrupted, "came from my daughter-in-law suggesting I need memory care, which, as you can see from my ability to recall every detail of tonight's conversation, is laughably false." I opened the desk drawer where Robert had kept his important papers. "My current will lay on top, the one that left everything to Michael with the understanding that he'd care for me in my old age. 50 years of savings, investments, this house, my grandmother's jewelry, Robert's life insurance payout. All of it meant to keep our family together. What a fool I'd been. "I want to make a new will," I said, placing the old document on the desk. "Tonight." Charles pulled out his legal pad. "All right. What changes do you want to make?" I smiled, and even I could hear the ice in it. I want to leave everything to Emma and Jake, my grandchildren. But not until they turn 30. Until then, the estate goes into a trust. That's substantial, Joe. Your estate is worth what, close to $2 million? 2.3 actually. Robert was very good with investments. I leaned forward. But here's the important part, Charles. I want Sandra and Michael to be specifically excluded. Not just left out, actively excluded. I want language that makes it clear they get nothing. Not a penny. Not a photograph. Nothing. Margaret looked up from her notes. Mrs. Aldridge, that's quite unusual language for a will. These are unusual circumstances. I could hear my old teacher voice creeping in, the one that had made troublemakers straighten their spines. I also want provisions that if anything happens to me, if I'm declared incompetent or moved to a care facility against my will, the trust provisions become even more restrictive. Charles was writing furiously. What about trustees? Who manages the money until Emma and Jake are 30? I'd already thought of this. My sister Ruth in Oregon, and you if you're willing. People with backbones. Joe, have you thought about the consequences? This will destroy your relationship with Michael. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My relationship with Michael was destroyed the moment he sat silent while his wife called me a burden in my own home. This just makes it official. For the next hour we worked through the details. Charles tried several times to talk me out of it, suggesting cooling-off periods and family counseling. But I'd made up my mind with the same certainty I'd once had when failing students who didn't do the work. Actions had consequences. Always. At 12:47 a.m., I signed the new will with my steady teacher's handwriting. Margaret notarized it with practiced efficiency. Charles made copies and sealed the original in his office envelope. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared to leave. I don't want Sandra and Michael to know about this until after I'm gone. Let them make their plans. Let them tour memory care facilities and discuss my episodes. When the time comes, they'll learn the truth. Charles paused at the front door. Joe, you're playing a dangerous game. What if they're right? What if you do need help as you get older? I thought of the way Sandra had looked at me tonight. Calculating, dismissive, like I was already dead. Then Emma and Jake will take care of me when they're old enough. Real family. Not people who see me as a burden to be managed. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the detritus of the dinner party. Wine glasses on side tables, crumpled napkins, the lingering smell of Sandra's jasmine perfume. The burgundy stain on my dining room floor caught the moonlight like a dark promise. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Thanks for dinner, Mom. We should talk soon about what we discussed. What we discussed. As if he'd been part of the conversation instead of a silent witness to his wife's cruelty. I typed back. Of course, sweetheart. I'm ready to discuss my future whenever you are. Then I deleted his number from my phone. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Somewhere upstairs, the loose floorboard in my bedroom squeaked. The same board Robert had been promising to fix for 20 years before cancer took him. Tomorrow I'd call a handyman. Tonight I had something else to do. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, pushing past decades of dresses to reach the small safe hidden behind my winter coats. Inside, along with important documents and my grandmother's pearls, was a manila folder I hadn't touched in 15 years. The folder contained private investigator reports from when I'd suspected Sandra was having an affair early in her marriage to Michael. I'd been wrong then. She wasn't cheating. But the investigator had uncovered something else. A pattern of financial manipulation with her previous boyfriend, credit cards opened in his name, small thefts from his business that were never prosecuted because he'd loved her too much to press charges. I'd never told Michael. I'd hoped marriage and motherhood would change her. Another mistake. But now, as I read through the old reports by lamplight, a new plan began forming in my mind. Because if Sandra wanted to play games with my future, she should know that some players had been in the game much longer than she realized. My phone rang, startling me from the reports. The caller ID showed Emma's cell phone. My 16-year-old granddaughter. Grandma Joe. Her voice was small, confused. Are you okay? Mom seemed really upset when we got home, and she was saying weird things about you moving away. I closed my eyes, feeling something crack inside my chest. This sweet girl, who still called me Grandma Joe like she had when she could barely talk, who came to me with boy troubles and college dreams her parents were too busy to hear. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said. Your mom was just worried about me after I dropped that glass. You know how she can be. Yeah, but... Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. She was on the phone with someone talking about memory care places. And Dad was looking up stuff on his computer about selling houses. Grandma, you're not sick, are you? The crack in my chest split wider. They weren't even waiting. The will wasn't even cold yet, and they were already making plans to dismantle my life. Emma, honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. Are you somewhere your parents can't hear you? Yeah, I'm in my room with the door closed. Good. I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, if I get sick or have to move or anything like that, I want you to call Charles Whitmore. He's my lawyer. Can you remember that name? Charles Whitmore, Emma repeated. Grandma, you're scaring me. Don't be scared, sweetheart. I'm just being careful. Sometimes adults make decisions that seem right to them but hurt other people. I'm just making sure you and Jake are protected. After Emma hung up, I sat in my bedroom holding the investigators' reports, listening to the house breathe around me. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 2 a.m. But sleep was impossible now, because Sandra had made one crucial mistake tonight. She'd assumed I was just a helpless old woman with no fight left. She was about to learn how wrong she could be. The morning after I signed my new will, I woke before dawn with the kind of clarity that comes after making an irreversible decision. The house felt different somehow. Lighter, as if removing Sandra and Michael from my future had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I made my coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, savoring the ritual. Robert and I had shared thousands of quiet mornings like this, reading the newspaper together in comfortable silence. Now I sat alone at the kitchen table, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. It felt dangerous. My phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. Good morning, Mom. Michael and I were talking and we'd love to take you to lunch today. There are some things we'd like to discuss. How about that new place on Maple Street? 1 p.m. I stared at the message, reading between the lines. They'd spent the night strategizing, probably making lists and researching facilities. They thought they had me cornered. I typed back. That sounds lovely, dear. See you then. Then I called Charles Whitmore. Joe, it's barely 7 a.m., his groggy voice answered. I need you to do something for me today, I said without preamble. Can you have someone at your office call Willowbrook Memory Care? I want them to schedule a tour for this afternoon. Around 2:30. There was a long pause. Are you having second thoughts about last night? Not at all. But Sandra and Michael are moving faster than I anticipated. They want to have lunch today to discuss things. I need to stay one step ahead. Joe, what are you planning? I smiled into the darkness. I'm planning to let them think they're winning. Can you make that call? After hanging up, I spent the morning preparing. I dressed carefully. A soft lavender cardigan that made me look fragile, comfortable shoes that suggested unsteadiness, and I deliberately mussed my usually neat hair. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what Sandra expected, a confused, elderly woman ready to be managed. But I also made other preparations. I called my bank and arranged for certain financial records to be pulled together. I contacted my insurance agent to review my policies. And I made one more call to that private investigator from 15 years ago. Some things, it turned out, were worth revisiting. The restaurant on Maple Street was one of those trendy bistros with exposed brick and overpriced salads. Sandra had chosen it deliberately. Public enough that I wouldn't make a scene, upscale enough to make her feel in control. I arrived exactly on time, moving with carefully rehearsed slowness. Mom! Michael stood to hug me, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the sweet boy he'd once been. Then Sandra's sharp smile came into view, and the spell broke. "You look tired," Sandra said, her voice dripping false concern as she air-kissed my cheek. "Did you sleep well?" "Oh, you know how it is," I said, settling into my chair with exaggerated care. "Sometimes I lie awake wondering if I remembered to lock the doors or turn off the stove. Last night I got up 3 times to check things." It was a complete lie, but I watched Sandra's eyes light up like she'd struck gold. "That must be so frightening," she said. "The uncertainty. Never knowing if your mind is playing tricks on you." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you don't have to." "It's all right, sweetheart," I interrupted, patting his hand. "Sandra's right. It is frightening. Sometimes I wonder if I'm becoming like my mother was at the end. My mother had died sharp as a tack at 91, but Sandra didn't know that." She leaned forward, sensing victory. "That's actually what we wanted to talk to you about," she said. "Michael and I have been researching some options. Places where you could have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence. Memory care facilities," I said quietly, letting my voice waver just slightly. "I've been thinking about that too." The lie came so easily it surprised me. But then, I'd spent 40 years managing difficult personalities. This was just another kind of classroom management. "Really?" Michael's relief was palpable. That's great, Mom. I was worried you'd be resistant to the idea." "Oh, I was at first," I said, carefully spearing a piece of lettuce. "But after last night, dropping that glass, forgetting things, maybe it's time to be practical." Sandra practically vibrated with excitement. "We've already looked at several places. There's one called Willowbrook that has an opening. It's beautiful, like a resort, really. And the staff is so well trained." "Willowbrook," I repeated, as if hearing it for the first time. "That sounds familiar. We could tour it today if you'd like," Sandra continued. "Just to see what it's like. No pressure." I pretended to consider this. "I suppose that would be sensible. What time?" "Well, we don't have an appointment yet, but I could call." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out my phone with shaking hands that were only half feigned, "I think I might have already called them. Yesterday, maybe. I've been so scattered lately." I squinted at my phone screen. "Yes, here it is. I have a tour scheduled for 2:30. The look that passed between Michael and Sandra was electric. They thought I was losing my grip on reality so badly that I'd scheduled my own institutionalization and forgotten about it. "That's perfect, Mom," Michael said. "We'll drive you there." "That's so thoughtful," I said, dabbing at my eyes with my napkin. "I don't know what I'd do without you two." Sandra reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was cold, calculating. "That's what family is for, Mom Aldridge. We'll take care of everything." The rest of lunch passed in a blur of false reassurances and careful planning. Sandra outlined their vision for my future with the efficiency of a corporate takeover, which I realized was exactly what this was. She'd dispose of my house, liquidate my assets, and park me somewhere convenient until I died quietly out of their way. But what struck me most was Michael's obvious relief. My own son was grateful to be rid of the responsibility of caring for me. That hurt more than Sandra's mercenary calculations. At 2:15 we pulled into the Willowbrook Memory Care parking lot. It was indeed beautiful. Manicured grounds, tasteful architecture, the kind of place that charged premium prices for premium dying. Sandra had done her research. Inside, we were greeted by a perfectly pleasant woman named Carol who gave us the full tour. Private rooms with bathroom facilities. Common areas designed to prevent wandering. Activities designed to keep residents engaged and calm. It was a gorgeous prison. "And what's the cost?" I asked, playing my role of confused elderly woman asking practical questions. "Our basic care package starts at $8,000 a month," Carol said smoothly. "But most families find the premium package more suitable for their loved ones' needs. That's $12,000. I saw Sandra's eyes widen slightly. Even with my insurance, that would eat through my assets quickly. Which was exactly what she was counting on. The faster my money disappeared into care costs, the sooner she could access whatever was left. That seems reasonable, I said. For the peace of mind. Mom, Michael said carefully. Are you sure about this? It's a big decision. For just a moment I wavered. Was there still a chance my son might grow a backbone? Might choose me over his wife's financial scheming? Then Sandra spoke up. Michael, your mother is being very brave. This is what's best for everyone. She turned to Carol. What's the process for admission? Well, we'd need a doctor's assessment, of course. And there are some legal documents to sign regarding power of attorney and financial arrangements. I can help with all of that, Sandra said quickly. I've been managing more and more of Mom's affairs lately anyway. That was news to me. But it explained a lot about her confidence in this whole scheme. Wonderful, Carol said. Let me get you some paperwork to get started. As Carol bustled away, Sandra turned to me with her brightest fake smile. See, this is going to work out perfectly. You'll have professional care, and Michael and I can visit whenever we want. And the house? I asked quietly. Oh, we'll take care of all of that, Sandra said. You don't need to worry about any of those details. She was right about that, but not in the way she thought. That evening, I sat in Robert's study with Charles Whitmore and 2 additional visitors. Margaret Chan had returned to notarize one more document. And David Morrison, the private investigator, had brought a thick manila folder that made my evening complete. You're sure about this, Joe? Charles asked one final time. Once we set these wheels in motion, there's no going back. I thought about Sandra's cold touch at lunch. About Michael's obvious relief at shipping me away. About the way they'd looked at each other when they thought I might be developing dementia. Not with sadness or concern, but with calculating anticipation. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Charles nodded and pulled out the documents. All right then. This is a durable power of attorney, naming your sister Ruth as your primary agent and me as secondary. It also includes specific language preventing Sandra from making any decisions about your care or finances. I signed with steady hands. This, Charles continued, pulling out another document, is a physician's directive stating that you are of sound mind and body, and that any attempts to declare you incompetent must be approved by 2 independent psychiatric evaluations. I'd visited my doctor that afternoon. Dr. Martinez had known me for 20 years and was happy to provide documentation of my excellent mental state. Especially after I'd explained what Sandra was attempting. I signed that document too. And this, David Morrison said, opening his folder, is everything I could dig up on Sandra's financial history. It's extensive. Over the next hour, David laid out a pattern of behavior that made my skin crawl. Sandra had been systematically stealing from Michael for years. Small amounts at first, but growing bolder over time. Credit cards opened in his name. Loans taken against his 401k. Investment accounts drained and closed. But the real revelation was her current plan. She'd already been in contact with a real estate agent about selling my house. Had gotten preliminary estimates on my assets. Had even researched the most expedient ways to gain power of attorney over an elderly person. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The dinner party confrontation hadn't been spontaneous cruelty. It had been a calculated first move in a long-planned game. There's more, David said grimly. She's been telling people around town that you're developing dementia. Laying the groundwork for an incompetency claim. I talked to 3 different people who said she'd mentioned your episodes. And how worried the family was. My hands clenched into fists. She'd been assassinating my character and reputation while smiling to my face and calling me Mom. What do you want to do with this information? David asked. I looked at the documents spread across Robert's desk. Legal protections, medical certifications, and damning evidence of Sandra's true nature. Everything I needed to protect myself and destroy her plans. But that wasn't enough anymore. Not after today. I want to set a trap, I said quietly. And I want to make sure she walks right into it. 3 weeks later I put my plan into motion. I called Sandra on a Tuesday morning, letting my voice shake with just the right amount of confusion and distress. "Sandra dear, I need help," I said. "I went to the bank yesterday and they said there were problems with my accounts. Something about unauthorized transactions. I don't understand any of it." Sandra's voice was honey-sweet with false concern. "Oh no, Mom. That sounds terrible. What kind of problems?" "I don't know," I said, sounding lost. The banker used so many big words. Something about someone using my credit cards. But I haven't used my credit cards in months. There was a pause. Calculating pause. "Mom, that sounds like identity theft," Sandra said carefully. "That's very serious. You could lose everything if we don't handle this right away." "Everything?" I let genuine fear creep into my voice. Because even though this was all theater, the idea of losing everything to Sandra's greed was terrifying. "Don't worry," Sandra said quickly. "Michael and I will come over right now. We'll help you sort this out. But Mom, we might need to take over your finances temporarily. Just until we can get this mess cleaned up. Would you do that?" "Yes." "I'm so scared, Sandra. What if they take the house?" "We won't let that happen," she promised. "We'll be there in an hour." After I hung up, I called Charles. "They're coming. Are you ready?" "The police are standing by," he said. "And I've got all the documents we need." "Joe, are you absolutely certain you want to do this to your own son?" I thought about Michael's silence during the dinner party. About his relief at shipping me off to Willowbrook. About the way he'd let Sandra manipulate him into betraying his own mother. "He made his choice," I said. "Now he gets to live with the consequences." Sandra and Michael arrived exactly 1 hour later. Sandra carrying a briefcase that probably contained power of attorney documents, and Michael looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mom, we're here to help," Sandra said, rushing to embrace me. "Tell us exactly what the bank said." I launched into a confused recitation of my conversation with the banker, describing transactions I didn't remember making and accounts I didn't know existed. All of it was true. Because Sandra had been the one making those transactions and opening those accounts. "This is worse than I thought," Sandra said, exchanging a meaningful look with Michael. "Mom, I think someone has been stealing from you for months, maybe years." "But who would do such a thing?" asked, my voice breaking. "I don't know," Sandra said. "But we need to act fast. I've brought some paperwork that will let us handle your finances while we sort this out. Just temporarily, until we catch whoever's been stealing from you." She opened her briefcase and pulled out power of attorney documents, financial authorizations, and what looked like preliminary paperwork for Willowbrook Memory Care. "I just need you to sign here," she said, pointing to signature lines. "This will protect you." I picked up the pen with shaking hands. "I'm so confused," I said. "Are you sure this is right?" "Absolutely," Sandra said. "Trust me, Mom. This is the only way to keep you safe." I was about to sign when the doorbell rang. "Who could that be?" Sandra asked, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "I don't know," I said, standing up slowly. "Let me go see." I opened the front door to find Charles Whitmore, David Morrison, and 2 police officers standing on my porch. "Mrs. Aldridge," Officer Rodriguez said, "we received a report about financial elder abuse. May we come in?" Behind me, I heard Sandra's sharp intake of breath. "Of course, officers," I said, stepping aside. "Though I'm not sure what this is about." We all filed into my living room, where Sandra and Michael sat frozen at my coffee table, surrounded by incriminating documents. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez continued, "we've been investigating reports of identity theft and financial manipulation involving your accounts. Do you know anything about that?" "Well," I said, settling into my chair, "someone has been stealing from me. Using my credit cards, taking money from my accounts. I was just asking my daughter-in-law and son to help me figure out who could have done such a terrible thing." David Morrison stepped forward. "Mrs. Aldridge, we have evidence that the person stealing from you is someone with access to your personal information. Someone who knew your social security number, your banking information, your account passwords. Sandra's face had gone white. I don't understand what's happening here. I think you do, Officer Rodriguez said. Sandra Aldridge, you're under arrest for financial elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud. The next few minutes were chaos. Sandra screaming about misunderstandings and false accusations. Michael demanding to know what was happening. Police officers reading Miranda rights while Charles calmly explained the evidence to anyone who would listen. But through it all, I sat quietly in my chair, watching my daughter-in-law realize that the helpless old woman she'd been manipulating had just destroyed her life. You did this, Sandra snarled at me as the officers handcuffed her. You crazy old bitch, you set me up. Language, dear, I said calmly. The children might be listening. Because Emma and Jake had arrived just as the police were loading Sandra into their car. My grandchildren stood on my front lawn, watching their mother's arrest with horrified confusion. Michael turned to me, his face a mask of betrayal and anger. How could you do this? She's my wife, the mother of my children. She's a thief, I said simply. And you enabled her. I had no idea what she was doing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text message from Michael, sent 3 days earlier. Thanks for understanding about the financial situation, Mom. Sandra really appreciates you letting us help manage things. His face crumpled as he read it. I thought. She said you'd asked for help. That you were having trouble managing your money. And you believed her without asking me directly. Michael couldn't meet my eyes. She showed me bank statements. Cancelled checks. She said you were getting confused about your spending. All fabricated, Charles said quietly. Your wife has been stealing from your mother for over 2 years, Michael. And recently, she accelerated her timeline. David Morrison stepped forward with his folder. We have evidence that she was planning to have your mother declared incompetent, gain power of attorney, and liquidate her assets. The memory care facility was just the first step. Michael sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Jesus Christ. What have I done? You chose to trust your wife over your mother, I said. And now Emma and Jake get to pay the price for both of your mistakes. At the mention of their names, Michael looked up sharply. The kids don't have anything to do with this. Don't they? Yes. Their college funds were part of Sandra's scheme. Did you know she'd already borrowed against their 529 accounts? Emma's Harvard dreams and Jake's art school aspirations. All mortgaged to fund your wife's shopping addiction. The devastation on Michael's face was complete. He'd lost his wife, his mother's trust, and his children's futures in one afternoon. What happens now? He asked quietly. Charles cleared his throat. Sandra will likely face federal charges. The financial damage is extensive. As for your mother's estate. He looked at me for permission to continue. I nodded. Michael, I changed my will 3 weeks ago. You and Sandra have been removed as beneficiaries. What? Everything goes to Emma and Jake when they turn 30. Until then, it's held in trust by people who actually care about this family's welfare. Michael stood up abruptly. You can't do that. I'm your son. Yes, I said sadly. You are. And you sat silent while your wife called me a burden and planned to steal everything your father and I worked for. Being my son should have meant something, Michael. But it didn't mean enough. He stared at me for a long moment, then walked toward the door. The kids will want to see you, he said quietly. After everything settles down. They're welcome anytime, I said. This house will always be their refuge. I just can't say the same for their parents anymore. After everyone left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the debris of destroyed relationships and necessary justice. The burgundy stain on my dining room floor had finally been cleaned up, but the memory of that night remained crystal clear. Charles lingered, gathering his papers slowly. Any regrets? He asked. I thought about Emma and Jake, who would grow up with their mother in prison and their father struggling to rebuild his life. I thought about the family dinners we'd never have again, the holidays that would forever be marked by this division. But then I thought about Sandra's cold calculation, her willingness to destroy me for financial gain. I thought about Michael's cowardice and willingness to abandon me when things got difficult. "No," I said finally. "Some people mistake kindness for weakness." Sandra learned the difference too late. Charles smiled grimly. "Remind me never to cross you, Josephine Aldridge. Don't steal from me or threaten my grandchildren, and we'll get along fine," I said. After he left, I walked through my house, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. It wasn't the house of a confused old woman who needed managing. It was the home of someone who'd spent 72 years learning how to fight for what mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Grandma Jo, are you okay? Mom got arrested and Dad won't stop crying. Can Jake and I come stay with you tonight?" I smiled and typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make hot chocolate and we'll figure everything out together." Because that's what real family did. They showed up when things got hard. They protected each other from people who would use love as a weapon. They chose loyalty over convenience, truth over comfort. Sandra had called me a burden that night at dinner. But burden implied weight, something heavy that dragged you down. What she'd failed to understand was that I wasn't a burden. I was an anchor. I was the thing that kept this family grounded, connected to its values and its history. And anchors, when threatened, don't just drift away. They dig deeper. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 8 times as I prepared for Emma and Jake's arrival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Court dates and therapy sessions and the hard work of rebuilding trust with my grandchildren. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. In my own home, surrounded by the things Robert and I had built together, ready to protect the people who actually mattered. Sandra had wanted to know who would inherit everything when I died. Now she knew. And she would have the rest of her prison sentence to think about how badly she'd miscalculated the helpless old woman who'd outmaneuvered her at every turn. The doorbell rang. Emma and Jake stood on my porch with overnight bags and confused, frightened faces that broke my heart. "Come in, my darlings," I said, opening my arms wide. "Grandma Jo has some stories to tell you. About family and loyalty, and why some fights are worth having." As I held my grandchildren close, breathing in their familiar scent and feeling their trust in my ability to make things right, I knew I'd made the correct choice. Love wasn't just about forgiveness and understanding. Sometimes love meant drawing lines in the sand and defending them with everything you had. Sandra had learned that lesson too late. But Emma and Jake would learn it at exactly the right time. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance I could possibly give them.